For years, Tristan Blackwell lived certain of one truth: he could not father a child. Doctors had said it. Experience had proven it. He had built his entire life and every calculated cruelty he inflicted on the world on that single, unshakable belief. It was the foundation of his coldness. It was the reason he kept everyone at arm's length. If there was no legacy to leave, there was no point in building anything other than walls. Which was why, on the night Amara Whitcomb's hand drifted faintly to her stomach and a tremor of genuine paralyzed fear crossed her face, the officer who had married her purely for revenge found himself staring as if the world had physically tilted beneath his boots. A child was impossible. Her fear was impossible, and yet the air in the room shifted. The silence that usually protected him shattered. It was the first crack in the life he thought he controlled. The first moment he realized that perhaps his punishment was not for her, but for him. Calcutta, British India, 1891. The heat in Calcutta was not just a temperature, it was a weight. It pressed against the shutters of the Blackwell estate, heavy with the scent of dust, drying mud, and jasmine that had begun to rot in the sun. But inside the library, the air was aggressively, unnaturally frigid. The thick velvet curtains were drawn tight, strangling the afternoon light, leaving the room submerged in shadow. Tristan Blackwell stood by the window, his back to the room. He was a man composed of sharp lines and rigid discipline. His uniform tunic hung on the chair, discarded, leaving him in a white linen shirt that seemed too stark against the gloom. He did not turn when the heavy oak door creaked open. He didn't need to look to know she was there. He could hear the hesitation in her footsteps, soft, uneven, terrified. "Come in," he said. His voice was low, devoid of any welcoming inflection. It was an order, not an invitation. Amara Whitcomb stepped into the room. She looked small against the towering bookshelves that lined the walls. She was 23, but in the dim light, stripped of her usual vibrant saris and dressed in a pale English-style gown that didn't quite fit her frame, she looked like a child. Her mixed heritage gave her features a striking, luminous quality that the English society wives whispered about behind their fans, but today she looked pale, waxy. She stopped 3 feet from the mahogany desk. "You sent for me, Captain Blackwell." Tristan finally turned. The movement was precise, controlled. The shadows caught the deep auburn of his hair, styled with an impeccable part, and illuminated the striking icy blue of his eyes. He was a handsome man, objectively, but it was the kind of handsomeness that felt dangerous, like a blade that was too sharp to hold. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the high-backed leather chair opposite his desk. Amara sat. She folded her hands in her lap, squeezing her fingers together so tightly the knuckles turned white. She didn't look at his face. She looked at the contract that lay on the desk between them. It was thick, heavy parchment, already signed by her father. The ink was still drying, smelling of iron and permanence. Tristan walked around the desk. The sound of his boots on the hardwood floor was a slow, deliberate rhythm. Thud, thud, thud. He stopped, leaning his hip against the edge of the desk, towering over her. "Do you know why you are here, Amara?" "My father," she whispered. Her voice trembled, but she cleared her throat and tried again, stronger this time. "My father said that an arrangement had been made." "An arrangement?" Tristan tasted the word, twisting it into something ugly. "That is a polite word for a sale." Amara flinched. She kept her eyes on her hands. "Look at me," he commanded. Slowly, painfully, she lifted her chin. When her dark eyes met his blue ones, Tristan felt a jolt of something he refused to name. Whatever it was, guilt, recognition, pity, he strangled it instantly. He needed to be cold. This only worked if he was cold. "Your father," Tristan said, his voice flat, "destroyed my family's name 7 years ago. He gambled away my inheritance, slandered my father's reputation, and left us with nothing but debts and a title that meant nothing in the gutters of London. I clawed my way back. I joined the army. I came here, and I rebuilt everything he took." He leaned in closer. "Now, I am taking the only thing he has left of value, his reputation, and his daughter." Amara's breath hitched. A tear slipped free, tracking hot and fast down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her wipe it away. "I am to be your wife," she said. It wasn't a question. "You are to be my wife," Tristan corrected. "But do not mistake this for a marriage. There will be no affection. There will be no partnership. You will be the mistress of this house. You will have clothes, food, protection. You will be safe from the creditors knocking at your father's door, but you will never be loved." The cruelty of the words hung in the air, vibrating. Amara swallowed hard, her throat bobbing. "And," Tristan continued, his voice dropping to a whisper that was somehow louder than a shout, "you will never be a mother." Amara's eyes widened. For the first time, the fear shifted into confusion. I do not understand." Tristan pushed off the desk and walked back to the window. He couldn't look at her for this part. He stared at the slit of light bleeding through the curtains. "I am incapable of siring children," he said. He said it with the same clinical detachment he used when reporting casualty numbers. "Doctors have confirmed it. Years of history have proven it. The Blackwell line ends with me, and the Whitcomb line ends with you." He turned back to face her, his expression granite. "That is my price, Amara. Your father's legacy dies. His name dies. You will live in this house, in luxury, until you are old and grey, and when we die, there will be no one left to remember either of us. That is the vengeance." He waited for her to scream, to cry, to beg. Amara did none of those things. She sat very still. She took a breath that shuddered in her chest, and then she nodded, just once. A small, jerky motion. "I understand," she whispered. Tristan felt a flash of irritation. He wanted her to fight. If she fought, he could destroy her. If she accepted it with this quiet, tragic dignity, he didn't know what to do with her. "The ceremony is in an hour," he said abruptly, turning his back on her again. "Go to your room. Wash your face. If you are to be my punishment, you will at least look presentable." The drive to the church was a blur of heat and dust. They sat opposite each other in the carriage, knees brushing with every bump in the road. Every time they touched, Tristan pulled his leg back as if he had been burned. Amara stared out the window at the passing city, the vendors selling marigolds, the British officers laughing on verandas, the life that was continuing on, indifferent to the fact that hers was ending. The church was empty. Tristan had ensured it. No guests, no flowers, no music, just the priest, an old man who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else, and the heavy, suffocating scent of incense. They stood at the altar. Tristan refused to look at her. He stared straight ahead at the stained glass window, focusing on a crack in the blue pane. He recited his vows like he was reading a supply list. "I, Tristan, take thee, Amara." His voice was steady, strong. It was the voice of a man who was used to giving orders. "I, Amara, take thee, Tristan." Her voice was a whisper, barely audible over the ceiling fans spinning lazily above them. When the time came for the ring, Tristan took her hand. Her skin was cold, despite the heat. Her fingers were slender, delicate. He slid the heavy gold band onto her finger. It felt like a shackle. He held her hand for a second longer than necessary, looking down at where his large, tanned hand engulfed hers. For a split second, he felt the urge to squeeze her fingers, to offer some small, human comfort. "She is the enemy," he reminded himself. "She is the daughter of the man who ruined you." He dropped her hand. "I now pronounce you man and wife." There was no kiss. Tristan simply nodded to the priest, turned on his heel, and walked back down the aisle. Amara stood there for a moment, blinking, before she gathered her skirts and hurried to catch up, her footsteps echoing in the vast, empty church. The return to the Blackwell estate was even more silent than the departure. Night had fallen, and the house was lit by gas lamps that cast long, flickering shadows against the walls. The servants were lined up in the foyer, their heads bowed. They knew better than to smile. They knew the master's mood. Tristan walked past them without a word, his boots striking the marble floor with military precision. Amara trailed behind him, looking like a ghost in her pale dress. They reached the top of the stairs. The corridor stretched out in both directions, dark and imposing. Tristan stopped at a heavy oak door on the right. "This is your room," he said. He didn't open it for her. Amara looked at the door, then at him. "And you?" "My chambers are at the other end of the hall," Tristan said, pointing into the darkness. "We will maintain separate quarters. As I said, there is no need for intimacy. The marriage is legal. That is all that matters." Amara looked at him, searching his face for some sign of softness. She found none. The man standing before her was a fortress. "Is there anything else, Captain?" she asked softly. "No." She placed her hand on the door handle. "Good night, then." "Amara," he said. She stopped, turning back with a flicker of hope in her eyes. Tristan looked at her. He took in the way the lamplight caught the stray curl of dark hair by her ear. He saw the exhaustion in the slump of her shoulders. He felt that dangerous pull in his chest again, that desire to protect the very thing he was trying to destroy. He hardened his jaw. "Do not expect this to get easier," he said. "I am not a kind man, and I do not change." The hope in her eyes died, extinguished like a candle in a draught. She nodded. "I never expected kindness, Captain," she said. "Only duty." She opened the door and slipped inside. The latch clicked shut. Tristan stood alone in the hallway. The silence of the house crashed down on him. It was what he wanted. He had won. He had secured his revenge. He had ensured that the Whitcomb line would end. He was in complete control. He walked down the hall to his own room, his boots heavy. He went inside, closing the door and locking it. He stripped off his tunic and threw it on the chair. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, his hand trembling slightly. He walked to the window and looked out at the dark gardens. He thought of her alone in that room down the hall. He thought of the way her hand had looked in his. He thought of the tears she hadn't wiped away. He lifted the glass to his lips, the burn of the alcohol doing nothing to numb the sudden, hollow ache in his chest. "I will break them," he whispered to the empty room, repeating the mantra he had used for 7 years, "even if I have to break her first." But as the moon rose over the manicured lawn, casting long, lonely shadows across the floor, Tristan Blackwell had the sinking, terrifying realization that for the first time in his life, he didn't want to be alone. Blackwell Estate. 2 weeks later. The silence in the Blackwell Estate was not empty. It was heavy. It had a texture like thick velvet draped over furniture that no one was allowed to sit on. It settled in the corners of the high ceilings and pooled on the marble floors, muffling the footsteps of the servants who moved like shadows, terrified to disturb the fragile, icy equilibrium their master had constructed. For Amara, the silence was a physical weight. She had learned the rhythm of the house quickly. She learned that the grandfather clock in the foyer chimed 3 minutes late. She learned that the afternoon sun hit the library veranda at exactly 4 o'clock, turning the dust motes into suspended gold, and she learned the sound of Tristan's boots. Heavy, rhythmic steps meant he was working, moving with purpose. Quick, sharp strikes meant he was late or impatient. And silence, absolute, predatory silence, meant he was watching. They existed in the same house like two ghosts haunting different centuries. They met only at dinner, a ritual that had become an exercise in torture. The dining table was long enough to seat 20 people. Tristan sat at the head, Amara at the foot, a vast expanse of polished mahogany stretching between them like a dark ocean. The distance was deliberate. The only sounds were the clinking of silver against china and the rhythmic ticking of the clock. Tristan cut his lamb with surgical precision. He didn't look up. He read a dispatch from the regiment, his brow furrowed, his auburn hair catching the candlelight. He looked impeccable, as always. Sharp jaw, stiff collar, not a single thread out of place. He was a man who wore his control like armor. Amara pushed a single pea around her plate. She wasn't hungry. She hadn't been hungry since the wedding. The food tasted like ash. She stared at Tristan, studying the way his hand gripped the wine glass, tight, white-knuckled. Suddenly, he looked up. His eyes, that piercing, impossible blue, locked onto hers down the length of the table. Amara froze, her fork hovering halfway to her mouth. "Is the food to your dissatisfaction?" he asked. His voice was smooth, cool water over stone. "No, Captain," Amara whispered. "Then eat. Wasting food is a trait of the spoiled." He went back to his paper. Amara swallowed hard, forcing herself to take a bite, the food sticking in her dry throat. She didn't see the way Tristan's eyes darted back to her for a split second, lingering on the hollow of her throat, his jaw tightening before he forced himself to look away. He wasn't angry about the food. He was angry because she looked pale, and he hated that he noticed. The veranda, 1 month later. The monotony was shattered on a Tuesday afternoon by a carriage clattering up the driveway with the subtlety of a cannon blast. Lord Everett Walsh did not knock. He burst through the double doors of the estate, his laughter echoing off the vaulted ceiling, carrying a toddler on his shoulders and dragging a woman in a sun hat by the hand. "Tristan!" Everett boomed, his voice filling the cavernous foyer. "Come out, you miserable hermit. We've come to save you from your own gloom." Tristan appeared at the top of the stairs. He looked down at the chaos with an expression of mild horror, though Amara, standing in the shadows of the parlour, thought she saw a flicker of something else in his eyes. Relief. "Everett," Tristan said, descending the stairs slowly. "I see you have lost the ability to use a doorbell." "Doorbells are for strangers and debt collectors," Everett grinned. He swung the toddler, a little girl with bouncing curls named Poppy, down from his shoulders. "Down you go, Poppy. Go find something expensive to break." Poppy squealed and took off running. Behind Everett stood Clara Walsh. She was everything Amara currently was not, vibrant, smiling, and visibly happy. She walked straight up to Tristan and kissed his cheek, ignoring his stiffness. "We brought peaches," Clara announced, "and wine and noise. You need all three." Tristan looked at his best friend. Everett was the only man who knew the truth about Tristan's past, about the debts, the struggle, and the sterility. He was the only one who didn't look at Tristan with fear. "Where is she?" Everett asked, looking around. "The bride, the prisoner, whatever you're calling her this week." "Amara is in the parlour," Tristan said stiffly. Amara stepped forward, smoothing her sari. "Lord Walsh, Lady Walsh." "Oh, none of that," Clara said, sweeping forward and taking Amara's hands. Her grip was warm, shocking against Amara's cold skin. "I'm Clara. This oaf is Everett, and the menace destroying your vase over there is Poppy." For the next 3 hours, the Blackwell estate felt like a different world. The silence was banished. Everett argued with Tristan about cricket scores. Clara asked Amara about her embroidery. Poppy ran in circles around the garden furniture. Tristan sat on the edge of the stone bench, a glass of brandy in his hand, watching. He watched Everett pick up Poppy and toss her into the air. He heard the child's shriek of pure delight. He saw the way Everett looked at his daughter, with a terrifying, consuming love. Tristan's hand tightened on his glass. He felt a phantom ache in his chest, a hollow space where that kind of future should have been. Impossible, the doctors had said. Barren. He turned his head and found Amara. She was standing by the rose bushes, watching Everett and Poppy. There was a look on her face that shattered him. It wasn't just sadness. It was a longing so deep, so raw, it mirrored his own. She wanted that. She wanted the laughter, the child, the warmth, and he had trapped her in a life where she would never have it. He had meant to punish her, but as he watched her watch them, he realized he was forcing her to share his own personal hell. "She's lovely, you know," Everett said, dropping onto the bench beside him. Tristan flinched, snapping out of his trance. "She is quiet. She's sad, Tristan. There's a difference." Everett took a sip of his drink. "You look at her when you think no one is watching." "I am ensuring she is behaving." "Rubbish," Everett scoffed. "You look at her like you're trying to solve a puzzle. She isn't her father, Tristan. You can't hate her just because it's convenient." Tristan set his glass down. The ice clinked. "I don't hate her, Everett. I feel nothing. That is the point." "You feel nothing?" Everett raised an eyebrow, gesturing with his chin toward Amara. "Then why is your hand shaking?" Tristan looked down. His hand was indeed trembling. He clenched it into a fist and shoved it into his pocket. "It's the caffeine. Leave it be." When the Walshes left, the silence rushed back in, twice as heavy as before. It felt suffocating now. The laughter had drained the oxygen from the house, leaving behind a vacuum of loneliness. The hallway. Late night. It was 2 in the morning. The heat had broken, leaving a cool, damp breeze drifting through the corridors. Tristan couldn't sleep. He had been staring at the ceiling for hours, Everett's words echoing in his head. "You look at her like you're trying to solve a puzzle." He got up, pulling on his robe, and walked into the hallway. He told himself he was going to the library for a book. He told himself he needed water, but his feet carried him to her door. He stopped outside Amara's room. The house was dead quiet. And then he heard it. It was a sound so soft he almost missed it. A muffled, wet hitch of breath. Then a stifle. Then a sob that broke free before being smothered into a pillow. She was crying. Tristan stood frozen in the hallway, the brass handle of her door inches from his fingers. He could picture her. He could see her curled on the massive empty bed, her dark hair spilled over the pillows, her body shaking with the grief she hid from him all day. He felt a physical blow to his chest. It wasn't pity, it was a sharp, jagged pain. He was the cause of this. He was the monster in the story. He had told himself it was justice, that he was balancing the scales. But standing there, listening to a woman weep in the dark, it didn't feel like justice. It felt like cruelty. He raised his hand. He wanted to open the door. He wanted to walk in. He didn't know what he would do. Sit on the edge of the bed. Tell her to stop. Apologize. The urge to comfort her was a sudden, violent instinct that terrified him. His fingers brushed the cold metal of the handle. "And then what, Tristan?" The voice in his head sneered. "You offer her a handkerchief. You offer her hope. You have nothing to give her. You are empty. You are broken. Go back to your room." His hand trembled. He saw his own reflection in the darkened glass of the window at the end of the hall, a tall, shadowy figure, hesitating, a coward. Inside the room, Amara let out another low, broken sob. Tristan closed his eyes. He grit his teeth so hard his jaw ached. Slowly, agonizingly, he pulled his hand back. He turned away from the door. He walked back to his room, his footsteps silent on the rug. He didn't go to the library. He went back to his bed and lay down in the dark, staring up at the ceiling fan slicing through the air. He didn't sleep. He lay there until the sun came up, listening to the silence, knowing that just down the hall she was awake too. The distance between their rooms was only 40 feet, but that night it felt like an ocean he was too weak to cross. Blackwell Estate, the monsoon season. The monsoon arrived not with a whimper, but with a violence that shook the very foundations of Calcutta. The sky turned a bruised, angry purple, and then the heavens simply opened up. Rain didn't fall. It was thrown against the earth, a relentless, deafening sheet of water that turned the gardens into mud and the air into liquid. For 3 days, the Blackwell Estate was an island. The roads were impassable. The windows were shuttered tight against the wind. The world outside ceased to exist, leaving only the two of them trapped inside the high, echoing walls. Tristan found the confinement maddening. He was a man of action, of drills and inspections. Without the regiment to distract him, he was left with nothing but the house, the rain, and her. He found her in the library on the second afternoon. The room was dark, lit only by a single oil lamp on the desk. The storm raged outside, throwing branches against the walls with dull thuds. Amara was sitting in the corner armchair, a book open on her lap, but she wasn't reading. Her head was turned toward the window, her body rigid. Every time a crack of thunder shook the floorboards, her shoulders jumped. It was a small, involuntary movement, like a bird twitching before flight. Tristan stood in the doorway, watching her. He should have turned around. He should have gone back to his study and poured another whiskey. But his feet remained planted. He watched the way her hands gripped the arms of the chair, her knuckles straining against the skin. He cleared his throat. Amara gasped, her hand flying to her chest as she spun around. When she saw him, the fear didn't leave her eyes. It just shifted targets. "Captain," she breathed, scrambling to stand up. I did not hear you enter." "The storm is loud," Tristan said. He walked into the room, the sound of his boots swallowed by the thick Persian rug. He stopped by the fireplace, keeping the width of the room between them. "You are not reading." Amara looked down at the book, a volume of poetry she had likely been staring at for hours without turning a page. "No, the light is poor. You are afraid of the thunder." It wasn't a question, it was an accusation. Amara stiffened, her chin lifting slightly. "I find it unsettling. The noise." Tristan studied her. She looked thinner. The dress she wore hung slightly loose at the waist. Her cheekbones were sharper than they had been on their wedding day. A sudden, irrational irritation flared in his chest. Not at her, but at the physical evidence of her misery. It was an indictment of his care. He had promised to provide for her, to keep her safe, even if he couldn't love her. A starving wife was a failure of duty. "Have you eaten today?" he asked abruptly. The question hung in the air, clumsy and harsh. Amara blinked, confused by the shift. I had tea this morning." "That was 7 hours ago," Tristan snapped. He saw her flinch at his tone, and he hated himself for it. He took a breath, forcing his voice to lower, to smooth out the edges. "You need to eat, Amara. You are vanishing." "I am not hungry, Tristan. Truly. I did not ask if you were hungry. I said you need to eat." He turned and walked to the bell pull, yanking it with more force than necessary. When the servant appeared, looking nervous, Tristan didn't look at him. "Bring the lamb," Tristan ordered. "And rice, and warm milk. Now." When the food arrived, He didn't leave. He stood by the mantelpiece, leaning against the cold marble, his arms crossed over his chest. He watched her. "Eat," he commanded. Amara sat back down. She picked up the fork, her hand trembling slightly. She took a bite of the rice. She chewed slowly, swallowing with difficulty. She could feel his eyes on her. It was unnerving, this sudden aggressive attention. He watched her like a hawk watching a mouse, tracking every movement of the fork from the plate to her lips. "Is it adequate?" he asked after a few minutes. "Yes, Captain." "Stop calling me that." She froze. "What should I call you?" "Tristan," he said, the name feeling strange in his own mouth. "My name is Tristan." She looked at him then. Really looked at him. The firelight caught the sharp angle of his jaw, the tension held in his shoulders. "Tristan," she tested the word. It sounded soft when she said it. "Intimate." He looked away, staring into the fire. "Finish the milk. It will help you sleep." He stayed until the plate was empty. He didn't speak again. He simply stood guard, a silent sentinel, ensuring that she was nourished, his presence a confusing mix of jailer and protector. When she set the fork down, he nodded once, stiffly, and walked out of the room without a backward glance. That night, the storm worsened. The wind howled around the eaves of the house like a dying animal. The rain hammered against the roof with such force that conversation would have been impossible. Tristan lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling. The clock chimed 2. Crack! A bolt of lightning struck somewhere close, the boom of thunder following instantly, shaking the window panes in their frames. Tristan sat up. He thought of her in the room down the hall. He thought of the way she had jumped in the library. He thought of her alone in the dark, clutching the sheets, waiting for the next strike. She is not your concern, his mind argued. She is a grown woman. She can handle a storm. She is your wife, a quieter, more dangerous voice whispered. He swung his legs out of bed. He didn't bother with a robe. He walked barefoot across the cold floor, wearing only his sleeping trousers and a white shirt unbuttoned at the throat. The hallway was pitch black, lit only by the occasional flash of lightning that illuminated the corridor in stark, ghostly flashes. He reached her door. He didn't knock. He turned the handle slowly and pushed it open. The room was dark, but the next flash of lightning revealed her. She was sitting up in bed, her knees pulled to her chest, her hands pressed over her ears. She was rocking slightly. "Amara!" she gasped, her head snapping up. "Tristan!" "The shutters," he lied smoothly, stepping into the room. "I came to check the latches. The wind is strong tonight. I did not want the glass to break." It was a pathetic lie. The shutters were bolted iron. They hadn't moved in 50 years. Amara lowered her hands. "They are secure. I will verify." He walked to the window, making a show of checking the iron latch. He stood there for a moment, looking out at the chaotic, drenched world. He could feel her eyes on his back. Another crack of thunder ripped through the sky. He heard the sharp intake of her breath, the rustle of sheets as she curled tighter into herself. Tristan didn't leave. He turned from the window and walked to the velvet armchair in the corner of her room. He sat down. He stretched his long legs out, crossing his ankles. He rested his head back against the chair and closed his eyes. "Go to sleep, Amara," he said, his voice calm, steady, cutting through the panic in the room. There was a long silence. You are staying." Her voice was small, incredulous. "I am tired," he said, keeping his eyes closed. "This chair is comfortable, and I do not trust the window." Another lie. But it was a lie she accepted. Slowly, the tension in the room began to unspool. His presence was a strange weight, heavy, solid, grounding. The storm was still raging outside, but inside, he was there. The man who terrified her was suddenly the only thing standing between her and the chaos. Amara lay back down. She pulled the duvet up to her chin. She watched him in the dim light. He looked peaceful, though she knew he wasn't asleep. His breathing was too controlled. "Tristan," she whispered. "Sleep," he ordered softly, and she did. For the first time in weeks, she felt safe enough to close her eyes. Tristan waited until her breathing evened out. He waited until the soft, rhythmic sound of deep sleep replaced the jagged breaths of fear. Then he opened his eyes. He watched her. He watched the way her dark hair spilled across the white pillowcase like ink. He watched the gentle rise and fall of her chest. In sleep, the worry lines on her forehead smoothed out. She looked young, innocent. She looked like someone who deserved to be loved. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He wasn't just ruining her life, he was wasting it. He was taking this beautiful, gentle creature and locking her in a cage of his own making, all because of a sin her father committed before she was even grown. He stood up. He moved silently to the side of the bed. He looked down at her face. His hand twitched at his side. He wanted to touch her. The urge was overwhelming. He wanted to brush the hair away from her cheek. He wanted to trace the line of her jaw. He wanted to feel the warmth of her skin, to prove to himself that she was real, and he wasn't just a ghost haunting this house. He reached out. His fingers hovered inches from her face. His hand shook. He saw his own hand, large, scarred, capable of violence. He saw it next to her porcelain skin. "You will break her," the thought whispered. "Everything you touch turns to ash. You are barren. You are empty. Do not contaminate her with your want." He curled his fingers into a fist. He pulled his hand back, clutching it to his chest as if he had been burned. He backed away from the bed, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He felt a sudden, crushing wave of self-loathing. He couldn't be this man. He couldn't be the man who sat in chairs watching his wife sleep because he was too broken to hold her. He turned and fled. He left the room before the sun came up, closing the door softly behind him. He walked back to his own cold, empty bed. The image of her sleeping face burned into his retinas. He knew, with terrifying certainty, that he was losing the war. He wasn't destroying her. Piece by quiet piece, she was dismantling him. Blackwell Estate. Early morning heat. The heat in Calcutta did not wait for noon. It arrived with the sun, heavy and suffocating, wrapping around the Blackwell Estate like a wet wool blanket. The air was thick with the scent of jasmine that had bloomed overnight. A cloying, sweet smell that mixed with the damp earth of the garden and the sharp tang of the Hooghly River in the distance. Tristan stood in the foyer, adjusting the cuffs of his uniform. He was running late, a concept that was usually foreign to him. His mornings were a grid of precise movements: shave, dress, coffee, horse, barracks. But this morning the grid was misaligned. He had buttoned his tunic wrong twice. He had cut himself shaving, a tiny nick on his jawline that stung when the sweat touched it. He caught his reflection in the hallway mirror. He looked composed. The red tunic was immaculate, the gold buttons gleamed, and his face was a mask of bored authority. But his eyes were tired. He hadn't slept properly since the night of the storm, since the night he had sat in the chair watching her breathe. He turned to grab his gloves from the side table just as the sound of footsteps echoed from the landing above. He didn't need to look up to know it was her. The rhythm was uneven, slower than usual. Amara was descending the grand staircase. She was dressed in a day dress of pale lavender, the fabric light and airy, but on her it looked heavy. Her hand gripped the banister with a tightness that turned her knuckles white. Tristan watched her. He told himself he was just waiting for her to pass so he could leave. He told himself it was polite to acknowledge his wife. But as she reached the halfway point of the stairs, something changed. She missed a step. It wasn't a stumble. It was a sway. Her body seemed to lose its structure for a fraction of a second, like a flower stem snapping in a breeze. Her head tilted back slightly, her eyes rolling toward the ceiling, and her hand, the one not gripping the rail, flew to her stomach. She clutched the silk at her waist as if she had been shot. Amara. The name left his mouth before his brain had given permission. She didn't answer. She took one more step, and her knees simply folded. Tristan moved. He didn't think. He didn't weigh the propriety of the moment or the cold distance he had sworn to maintain. He moved with the explosive, terrifying speed of a soldier reacting to an ambush. He crossed the marble foyer in 2 strides, his boots skidding slightly on the polished stone as he lunged up the stairs. He reached her a split second before she would have collapsed. But he didn't grab her. His arms flew out, surrounding her, creating a cage of red wool and muscle to catch her fall, but his hands hovered inches from her skin. He was terrified to touch her. He was terrified that if he made contact, he would crush her, or worse, that the electricity of touching her would shatter the precarious glass wall he had built between them. "Breathe," he ordered. His voice was cracked, harsh with panic. "Sit down." Amara slumped onto the step, her body listing to the side. Her head fell back against the banister. Her skin was the color of old paper. Tristan dropped to one knee on the step below her. He was eye level with her waist. He stared at her hand, still clutching her stomach, her fingers digging into her abdomen. "Amara!" he barked, louder this time. "Look at me!" Her eyelids fluttered. She let out a low, miserable moan. "The heat," she whispered, her voice slurring. "The air is thick." "It is the heat," Tristan agreed instantly. He latched onto the explanation like a lifeline. It had to be the heat. She was English. She was delicate. This climate chewed people up and spat them out. It was a logical, solvable problem. You are dehydrated. You are foolish for wearing this corset in this weather. He twisted his head toward the bottom of the stairs, the veins in his neck bulging. "Water!" he roared. The sound echoed off the vaulted ceiling, violent and demanding. "Get ice! Get a fan! Move!" Two servants scrambled from the shadows of the dining room, their eyes wide with terror. They had seen the captain angry before, cold, quiet anger. They had never seen him frantic. They ran. Tristan turned back to Amara. She was taking shallow, quick breaths. "I am dizzy," she murmured, closing her eyes again. "Everything is spinning." "Open your eyes," Tristan commanded. He leaned in, his face inches from hers. He could smell the soap she used, something floral and soft. He could see the sheen of perspiration on her upper lip. "Focus on me. Do not close your eyes." He wanted to take her pulse. He wanted to put his hand on her forehead to check for fever. His hand twitched at his side, his fingers flexing, but he couldn't do it. He gripped his own knee instead, anchoring himself. "I am here," he said, the words slipping out in a rough whisper. "I have you. You are not falling." Amara opened her eyes. They were glassy, unfocused. She looked at him with a confusion that broke his heart. "Tristan?" "Yes." "You look scared." "I am not scared," he snapped, his voice tight. "I am annoyed. You are disrupting my schedule." It was a lie so transparent it was almost laughable. His heart was hammering against his ribs so hard he thought it might crack the bone. He wasn't annoyed. He was terrified. For a brief, horrible second when she swayed, he had thought she was dying, and the sheer black volume of panic that had surged through him was a revelation he wasn't ready to face. The servants returned, breathless. One held a silver tray with a glass of water. The other held a fan. Tristan snatched the glass. The water sloshed over the rim, wetting his glove. "Drink," he said, holding the glass to her lips. His hand was shaking. He had to use his other hand to steady the glass, his leather glove brushing against her chin. She drank. She took small, tentative sips, her throat working. Tristan watched the movement of her throat, mesmerized. "Slowly," he murmured. "Do not choke. Good God, man." The voice came from the open front door. Tristan stiffened. He didn't look away from Amara, but his posture rigidified. Lord Everett Walsh was standing in the doorway, framed by the blinding morning sunlight. He was dressed for riding, holding a half-eaten apple in one hand and a riding crop in the other. He took in the scene. Amara, pale, and slumped on the stairs, the servants hovering with fans, and Tristan kneeling at her feet, holding a glass of water like it was the Holy Grail, his face a portrait of devastation. Everett took a bite of his apple. Crunch. "You look like you're the one who's going to faint, Tristan," Everett drawled, walking into the foyer. "Should I call for the smelling salts for you? Or for her?" Tristan lowered the glass. Amara had some color back in her cheeks. She took a deep breath and sat up straighter, pulling away from him. The loss of proximity felt like a physical chill. "She is unwell," Tristan said, standing up. His knees cracked. He smoothed his tunic, trying to regain some semblance of dignity. "The heat affects her." "The heat," Everett repeated, skeptical. He walked over to the stairs and peered at Amara. "You all right, love? You look a bit green." "I am fine, Lord Walsh," Amara said, her voice weak but steady. She tried to stand. Tristan's hand shot out again, hovering behind her back, ready to catch her. "Do not stand yet. You are weak." "I am fine," she insisted. She grabbed the banister and pulled herself up. She swayed slightly, and Tristan flinched, his whole body jerking forward. Everett watched Tristan's reaction. He saw the way Tristan's eyes tracked Amara's every movement. He saw the sweat on Tristan's brow that had nothing to do with the temperature. "Maybe you should carry her," Everett suggested, a wicked glint in his eye, "since she's so fragile." Tristan glared at him. "She is capable of walking. She is not an invalid." I will return to my room, Amara said quietly. She couldn't look at Tristan. She was embarrassed by her weakness and confused by the intensity of his reaction. I apologize for the disruption, Captain. She turned and began to climb the stairs, slowly, one hand on the rail, the other still pressed to her stomach. Tristan watched her go. He didn't move until she had disappeared around the landing. When he turned back to Everett, the mask was back in place, but it was cracked. "We are late for the inspection," Tristan said abruptly. He walked past Everett toward the door, grabbing his riding helmet. "Tristan," Everett said. Tristan stopped, his hand on the doorframe. "She held her stomach," Everett said softly. Tristan turned slowly. She was nauseous. It is a common reaction to dizziness. She didn't hold her head. She held her belly. Everett tossed the apple core into a potted fern. Clara held her stomach like that. Before we knew about Poppy, the air in the foyer vanished. Tristan's face went deadly pale. A muscle in his jaw jumped. "Do not be absurd. It's a simple biological function, Tristan. People marry. People—" "I cannot father a child," Tristan shouted. The volume of his voice shocked them both. It rang off the marble floors. Tristan breathed heavily, his chest heaving. "I have told you. The doctors in London, the injury from the campaign. It is impossible. Do not speak of it again. It is cruel to suggest it." Everett looked at his friend with a mixture of pity and frustration. "Doctors are often wrong, Tristan, and miracles happen, especially when you spend as much time not touching your wife as you do." "We are leaving," Tristan hissed. He marched out the door and down the steps to his horse. But they didn't leave. Not immediately. Tristan mounted his horse. He gathered the reins. He looked at the gate. Then he looked back at the house. He looked at the window on the second floor. Her window. The curtains were drawn. "Go on," Tristan said to Everett. I have forgotten my dispatch case." "You're holding it," Everett pointed out, gesturing to the leather case strapped to Tristan's saddle. Tristan looked down at the case. He flushed. "I have forgotten the other case. Go. I will catch up." Everett shook his head, sighing, and kicked his horse into a trot. "You're a terrible liar, Blackwell." Tristan waited until Everett was out of sight. Then he dismounted. He handed the reins to a confused stable boy and walked back into the house. He climbed the stairs, his boots heavy and silent on the carpet runner. He walked down the hallway. He stopped outside her door. He didn't knock. He didn't enter. He just stood there. He stood with his forehead pressed against the wood, listening. He could hear the faint rustle of sheets. He could hear the soft clinking of the water glass being set on the bedside table. He closed his eyes. The panic he had suppressed downstairs came rushing back, choking him. What if it was true? The thought was a terrifying, blinding light in his mind. A child. He looked at his hands, the hands that had killed men, the hands that had destroyed her father, the hands that were too afraid to touch her skin. Impossible, he told himself. It is the heat, just the heat. But as he stood there in the silent hallway, ignoring the duty calling him to the barracks, ignoring the world he had built on order and control, Tristan Blackwell realized with a sinking dread that he was praying. He, a man who believed in nothing, was praying that she was safe, and beneath that, buried under layers of fear and denial, was a treacherous, tiny spark of hope that terrified him more than any battlefield ever had. He stayed there for 20 minutes. He missed the inspection. He missed the morning briefing. He just stood guard outside a closed door, protecting a secret he wasn't ready to know. The officers' club, midnight. The air in the officers' club was thick enough to chew. It smelled of stale tobacco, spilled gin, and the sweaty desperation of men trying to forget they were thousands of miles from home. Ceiling fans sliced through the smoke, but they did nothing to cool the rage simmering in Tristan Blackwell's blood. He stood at the bar, his knuckles white around a crystal tumbler. "Another," he said. The bartender hesitated. "Captain Blackwell, that is your fifth." Tristan lifted his eyes. They were not their usual icy blue. They were dark, dilated, burning with a frightening intensity. "Did I ask for a count, or did I ask for a drink?" The bartender poured. The amber liquid splashed against the glass, erratic and messy. Tristan didn't drink it for the taste. He drank it to wash away the sound of the laughter he had heard an hour ago. He had seen him. Richard Whitcomb, Amara's father. The man had been sitting at a card table in the corner, flush with the allowance Tristan provided him as part of the marriage contract. He was laughing, a loud, wet sound that grated on Tristan's nerves like a file against bone. Tristan had walked past, intending to ignore him, but Whitcomb had grabbed his arm. "Blackwell," the older man had slurred, his face red with wine. "How is she? How is my little burden?" Tristan had frozen. He looked down at the hand on his uniform sleeve, the hand of the man who had sold his daughter to clear a gambling debt. "She's well," Tristan had said, his voice deadly quiet. "Good, good," Whitcomb chuckled, releasing him to pick up his cards. "Better you than me, eh? She's a quiet thing. Boring, never laughed, always looking at you with those big, tragic eyes. But she keeps a clean house, I suppose. Just don't expect any fire in the bed, eh?" The table of men had laughed. Tristan hadn't moved. For 3 seconds, he had calculated the precise angle required to break Whitcomb's nose. He had visualized the crunch of cartilage, the silence that would follow. But he hadn't done it. He was Captain Blackwell. He was controlled. He was ice. He had walked away. But the rage had followed him. It sat in his chest, hot and heavy, boring, burden, fire. He slammed the glass back onto the bar. The sound was like a gunshot. "He doesn't deserve her," Tristan muttered to the empty stool beside him. He wasn't talking about Whitcomb anymore. He wasn't sure who he was talking about. Maybe himself. He drank the whiskey in one swallow. It burned, but not enough. The world tilted slightly to the left. "I'm going home," he announced to no one. He didn't wait for his carriage. He walked. He needed the heat. He needed the punishment of the humidity pressing against his skin. He walked through the dark streets of Calcutta, his boots stumbling over the cobblestones, his tunic unbuttoned at the collar, his perfect hair falling into his eyes. He was a mess, and for the first time in 7 years, he didn't care. Blackwell Estate, 1 a.m. The house was a mausoleum, dark, silent. Tristan fumbled with the key, scratching the brass plate before finally shoving the door open. He stumbled into the foyer. He should go to his room. He should pass out in his chair and wake up with a headache and his regret. That was the routine. But his feet didn't listen to the routine. They listened to the pull. He walked up the stairs, gripping the banister to keep the floor from rushing up to meet him. He walked past the portrait of his grandfather, past the empty guest rooms, past the library. He stopped at her door. He leaned his forehead against the wood. It was cool. "She is asleep," his mind reasoned. "Leave her be. You are drunk. You are dangerous." "I am lonely," his heart whispered back. It was a pathetic, small sound. He turned the handle. The door was unlocked. Of course it was. She never locked it. She probably didn't know she could. He pushed it open. The room was bathed in the soft, flickering glow of a single candle. Amara was not asleep. She was sitting up in bed, a book resting on her knees, wearing a white cotton nightgown that buttoned to her throat. Her hair was loose, a dark river spilling over her shoulders. When the door opened, she jumped, pulling the sheet up to her chest. "Tristan!" Her voice was a whisper, laced with fear. He stood in the doorway, swaying. He knew what he looked like. His eyes were wild, his face flushed, his shirt half unbuttoned. He looked like every nightmare she had ever been warned about. He tried to speak, but his tongue felt thick. "I came back." Amara set the book down. She watched him carefully, her eyes wide. She saw the sway. She smelled the whiskey from across the room. "You are unwell," she said softly. "I am drunk," he corrected, stumbling forward. He caught himself on the edge of the tall wardrobe. "I am very, thoroughly drunk. Tristan, you should be in bed." "No." The word came out louder than he intended. He winced, bringing a hand to his temple. "No, not my bed." He pushed off the wardrobe and walked toward her. His steps were heavy, uncoordinated. Amara shrank back against the headboard, her breath catching in her throat. He reached the side of the bed. He loomed over her, blocking out the candlelight. Amara stopped breathing. She waited for the anger. She waited for the cruelty. But Tristan didn't yell. He crumbled. It was as if his strings had been cut. He sank to his knees beside the bed, the movement devoid of grace. He landed hard on the rug, his hands gripping the edge of the mattress as if it were a raft in a storm. He rested his forehead against the quilt, right beside her hip. "Tristan?" she whispered, her fear shifting instantly to confusion. He laughed. Tristan mumbled into the fabric. "He laughed about you." "Who?" "Your father." Tristan turned his head, resting his cheek on the mattress so he could look up at her. His eyes were glassy, red-rimmed, and stripped of all their usual defenses. They were the eyes of a boy who was lost. "He called you a burden! He doesn't know! He is a fool!" Amara stared down at him. The feared Captain Blackwell was kneeling on her floor, smelling of scotch and sorrow, defending her honor against a man he hated. "He is a cruel man, Tristan. You know this." "I hate him," Tristan said, the venom in his voice mixing with a slur. "I hate him for hurting you. And I hate that I am like him." "You are not like him." "I am," he insisted. He closed his eyes, a single tear slipping out to wet the quilt. "I bought you. I trapped you. I am a monster, Amara. I am a barren, empty monster." "Tristan, stop. I came here because—" He took a shuddering breath. "Because the silence in my room is too loud. It screams at me. It tells me that I end with me, that there is no future." He opened his eyes. He looked at her with a naked, desperate longing that stole the air from her lungs. "But in here," he whispered, "it is quiet. You are quiet." He reached out. His hand trembled violently. He touched a lock of her hair that had fallen over the edge of the bed. He rubbed the silk strands between his rough fingers, staring at it like it was a holy relic. "Soft," he murmured. Amara's heart hammered against her ribs. She should send him away. She should be afraid. But she looked at the curve of his neck, exposed and vulnerable. She looked at the pain etched into his forehead. Without thinking, she reached out. Her hand cupped his cheek. His stubble was rough against her palm. Tristan froze. He leaned into her touch. He pushed his face into her hand, closing his eyes, letting out a sound that was half groan, half sob. It was the sound of a man who had been starving for a decade, finally tasting bread. "Amara," he breathed. He turned his face and pressed a kiss to the center of her palm, then her wrist. His lips were hot, feverish. "I am sorry," he whispered against her skin, his voice breaking. "I am so sorry." He looked up at her, and the air between them charged, snapping with electricity. The grief in his eyes shifted, darkening into something else, something ancient. He stood up. He didn't sway this time. He sat on the edge of the bed. Amara didn't pull away. She stayed frozen, her hand still hovering in the air where his cheek had been. He reached out and cupped her face with both hands. His thumbs traced her cheekbones. "You are not a burden," he said, his voice rough. "You are the only thing in this house that is real." He lowered his head. When his lips touched hers, it wasn't the kiss of a husband claiming a right. It was a question. It was a plea. Amara hesitated for a heartbeat, and then she softened. She opened her mouth, and Tristan groaned, a low vibration in his chest. The kiss deepened. The anger, the whiskey, the months of silence, the storm. It all poured into that kiss. It was clumsy and desperate and overwhelmingly human. He tasted of alcohol and salt tears. He kissed her like he was drowning and she was oxygen. He pushed her back against the pillows. His weight settled over her, heavy and solid. "Tristan!" she gasped against his mouth. "Let me," he whispered, burying his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling her scent. "Just for tonight. Let me pretend I am a man who can give you everything." The candle burned low. The shadows lengthened, and in the center of the vast, silent estate, the walls finally came down. The morning after. The sun was cruel. It sliced through the gap in the curtains with the precision of a scalpel, landing directly on Tristan's eyes. He woke with a gasp. The headache was instantaneous, a hammer striking the inside of his skull, but the memory was sharper. He sat up. He was in her bed. He looked down. He was wearing his trousers, but his shirt was gone. Amara was asleep beside him, her back to him, the sheet pulled up to her shoulder, her bare shoulder. The events of the night crashed into him. The crying, the kneeling, the confession, the desperate, feverish need. Tristan went cold. He scrambled out of bed, grabbing his shirt from the floor. His hands shook as he pulled it on. He felt sick, not from the alcohol, but from the exposure. He had cracked. He had shown her the broken parts. He had violated his own rules, his own boundaries. He had taken her, not by force, never by force, but by manipulation. He had used his pity and his drunkenness to get what he wanted. And what happened next? What happened when she realized he was still the same barren, useless man he was yesterday? He couldn't face it. He couldn't face the look of pity in her eyes when she woke up. He buttoned his tunic wrong, swore, and ripped it open to do it again. He needed his armor. He needed the captain. "Tristan?" The voice was sleepy, soft. He froze. He didn't turn around. He stood by the door, staring at the brass handle, his back rigid as a board. "Go back to sleep," he said. His voice was unrecognizable, scraped hollow, devoid of warmth. "Tristan, are you—" "That was an error," he interrupted. He spoke quickly, clinically. "I was intoxicated. It was a lapse in judgment, an immense failure of discipline." Silence from the bed. A hurt, confused silence. "It will not happen again," Tristan said to the door. "I will not impose on you again. You have my word." He grabbed the doorknob, his knuckles white. "But Tristan—" "I have duties," he snapped. "Good day." He opened the door and walked out. He closed it firmly behind him. Inside the room, Amara sat up, clutching the sheet to her chest. The space beside her was still warm. The scent of him, whiskey, sandalwood, and man, clung to the pillows. She stared at the closed door. The coldness of his voice still echoed in the room, erasing the heat of the night before. She raised her hand slowly and touched her lips. They were swollen, bruised. She felt a tear slide down her cheek, hot and fast. She didn't wipe it away. She just sat there in the morning light, stunned by the whiplash of being worshipped in the dark and discarded in the dawn. Tristan Blackwell had not just broken his own rules. He had broken her heart because for a few hours he had let her believe he actually had one. Blackwell Estate, 2 months later. The clock in the hallway struck 3. The sound reverberated through the silent house, a deep, brassy toll that usually marked the deepest part of the night. Tristan Blackwell was awake. He was often awake these days, his mind a restless engine that refused to cool down. He sat in his study, a stack of regimental reports in front of him, the oil lamp casting long, flickering shadows against the bookshelves. He heard a noise. It came from the kitchens, a soft scrape, the thud of a cabinet door. Tristan frowned. He stood, picking up the lamp. He moved into the hallway, his bare feet silent on the cold stone. He was not wearing his tunic, only his trousers and a white shirt, unbuttoned at the cuffs. He walked toward the back of the house. The kitchen was dark, save for a small candle burning on the prep table. Amara was there. She was sitting on a wooden stool, her nightgown pooled around her bare feet. In front of her was a platter that had, until recently, held a pyramid of mangoes. Now it held only pits and peels. She was slicing into the last one with a paring knife. Her focus absolute. Tristan stood in the doorway, lowering the lamp. "Amara!" She jumped, the knife clattering against the plate. She looked up, her eyes wide, guilt written plainly across her face. A smear of golden juice marked her chin. "Tristan," she whispered. I did not hear you." "It is 3 in the morning," he said, stepping into the room. He looked at the carnage of fruit on the table. "Are you ill?" "No," she said quickly. She picked up a slice of mango, the juice running down her fingers. She looked at it with a longing that was almost indecent. "I simply required them." "Required them?" Tristan repeated. "They are fruit, Amara, not medicine." "I woke up," she explained, her voice gaining a strange, stubborn edge he had never heard before. "And I could smell them. Through the floorboards, through the door. I could not sleep until I had tasted one." Tristan stared at her. This was the woman who, 2 months ago, had barely eaten a pea at dinner. Now she was devouring mangoes in the middle of the night, like a starving creature. "You have eaten 4, he noted, counting the pits. 5, she corrected, taking a bite of the slice in her hand. She closed her eyes as she chewed, a soft sound of satisfaction escaping her throat. Tristan watched her throat work. He felt a strange sensation in his own stomach, a lurch, a sudden, violent turn. He swallowed hard, looking away from the sweet, sticky fruit. The smell of it, usually pleasant, suddenly seemed cloying, overwhelming. "Go to bed when you are finished," he said, his voice tight. "Do not wander the house in the dark. It is unsafe." He turned and walked away quickly. He needed to get away from the smell of the mangoes. His stomach rolled again, uneasy and sour. He blamed the heat. It was always the heat. The passage of weeks. The household began to shift. The rigid order Tristan had imposed was fraying at the edges, unraveled by a series of inexplicable events. One afternoon, Tristan returned early from the barracks to find the house silent. He found Amara in the parlor. She was not embroidering. She was not reading. She was asleep on the sofa in the middle of the day. He stood over her, frowning. Her breathing was deep, heavy. Her hand was tucked under her cheek. She slept with the exhaustion of a labourer, though she had done nothing but arrange flowers that morning. He watched her for 10 minutes. He checked her forehead for fever. Cool. He checked her pulse. Strong. He left her there, ordering the servants to walk softly. 2 days later, at breakfast, the tea was served. Amara lifted the cup, took one sip, and set it down with a clatter. Her lip trembled. "It is brown," she whispered. Tristan looked up from his newspaper. "It is tea, Amara. Tea is brown." "It is too brown," she choked out. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling over instantly. "It looks like mud. It is dreadful." She stood up and fled the room, leaving Tristan staring at the teapot in bewilderment. He poured a cup. He tasted it. It was Earl Grey. It tasted exactly like Earl Grey. "Madness," he muttered to himself, rubbing his temple. "The isolation is driving her mad." But it wasn't just her. Tristan found himself unable to tolerate the smell of his own shaving soap. He ordered the valet to throw it out. He found his uniforms felt too tight around the neck. He felt tired, a bone-deep weariness that coffee could not touch. The study, 1 week later. Lord Everett Walsh sprawled in the leather armchair in Tristan's study, looking entirely too cheerful for the humidity. "You look ghastly," Everett remarked, swirling his brandy snifter. "Truly. Have you stopped sleeping entirely? You're a shade of grey that usually indicates a corpse." Tristan was pacing the length of the rug. He looked wretched. His skin was pale, his eyes shadowed. He kept swallowing, as if fighting down bile. "I am fine," Tristan snapped. "It is a stomach complaint. The cook has been careless with the spices." "The cook has been with you for 5 years, Tristan. He hasn't poisoned you yet." Everett took a sip of brandy. "And Amara. How is the lady of the house?" Tristan stopped pacing. He leaned against the desk, looking out the window. "She is changed. She weeps over nothing. She eats at odd hours. She sleeps like the dead." Everett went very still. He set his glass down on the side table. "Tristan," he said slowly, "she is nesting." "Nesting?" Tristan turned, scowling. "She is not a bird, Everett." "She is with child," Everett said. He said it plainly, without a joke to soften it. The silence that followed was absolute. Tristan stared at his friend. For a moment, he didn't comprehend the words. Then the meaning landed, and with it, a surge of violent denial. "Impossible," Tristan said. His voice was cold, shutting the door on the idea instantly. "Is it?" Everett raised an eyebrow. "The symptoms, man. The appetite, the emotions, the fatigue. Clara was exactly the same. I once found her crying because her shoes were looking at her accusingly." "Amara is not Clara," Tristan said, his voice rising, "and I am not you. I cannot father a child." "So you have said. For years." "Because it is true." Tristan pushed off the desk, his agitation boiling over. "The doctors in London were clear. The injury I sustained, the fever, they said the damage was absolute. There is no seed. There is no heir. It is a biological fact." "Doctors are idiots," Everett dismissed. "They told my uncle he had a week to live, and he's currently 92 and outliving his third wife. Look at the evidence, Tristan." "I will not!" Tristan roared. He slammed his hand on the desk. "I will not look at false hope. Do you know what that would do? To believe it, and then to be wrong?" He turned away, his chest heaving. "She is merely adjusting to the climate. It is the heat. It is always the heat." Everett picked up his brandy again. He lit a cigar, blowing a cloud of thick blue smoke into the room. "Well," Everett drawled, "if you are so certain, then have a drink with me to your childless existence." The smell of the cigar smoke hit Tristan like a physical blow. It was pungent, heavy, oily. Tristan turned green. He brought a hand to his mouth, his eyes watering. "Put that out." "Why?" Everett grinned through the haze. "It's a fine Cuban." "It smells like rotting flesh," Tristan choked. He gagged, a visceral, wet sound. He lunged for the wastepaper bin, heaving dryly over it. Everett burst out laughing. He laughed so hard he nearly dropped the cigar. "Oh, this is rich," Everett crowed. "Sympathetic sickness. You are in sympathy with her." Tristan wiped his mouth with a handkerchief, glaring at Everett with pure hatred. "I am sick from your vile tobacco." "You are pregnant, Captain Blackwell," Everett howled, slapping his knee. "Or rather, she is, and your body is so attuned to hers that you're suffering for it. It happens. My father was sick as a dog when my mother carried me." "Get out," Tristan rasped, leaning against the wall for support. "Get out of my house." I'm leaving, Everett said, standing up, still chuckling. He patted Tristan on the shoulder as he passed. "Congratulations, Papa. You might want to invest in some ginger root. For both of you." When the door closed, Tristan sank into his chair. He was shaking. Impossible, he told himself. Impossible, but his hand drifted to his own stomach, which was still churning, echoing a condition he refused to name. The hallway. Moments later. Tristan waited until the nausea subsided, then he walked out into the foyer. He needed air. He needed to inspect the stables. He needed anything that made sense. Amara was crossing the hall. She was carrying a basket of flowers she had cut from the garden, marigolds and jasmine. The scent was overpowering in the enclosed space. She looked up and saw him. She smiled, a tentative, soft thing. "Tristan," she said, "the garden is—" She stopped. Her face went slack. The color drained out of her cheeks, as if someone had pulled a plug. The basket slipped from her fingers. It hit the marble floor with a soft thud, flowers spilling everywhere in a riot of orange and white. Amara swayed. Her hand flew to her stomach. Not her head, her stomach. Tristan didn't think. He didn't analyze. The soldier in him took over. He crossed the distance between them in a blur of motion. "Amara!" He caught her just as her knees gave way. He scooped her up, his arms going under her knees and around her back. She was light, terrifyingly light, but also soft. Her head lolled against his shoulder. She hadn't fainted completely. She blinked, looking up at him with dazed, unfocused eyes. "I am sorry," she whispered, her speech slurring. The floor, it moved. Tristan held her tight against his chest. He could feel the heat radiating from her skin. He could smell the milk she had bathed in, the mangoes she had eaten, the scent of her hair. And suddenly, holding her there in the middle of the foyer with the spilled flowers around his boots, the denial shattered. It wasn't a crack. It was a demolition. He looked at her hand, still clutching her midsection protectively. He looked at the fullness of her breasts pressing against her bodice. He felt his own stomach turn in a mirror of her sickness. He stood there, frozen, holding the wife he had sworn not to touch, realizing with a terrifying clarity that the doctors, the science, and his own iron-clad certainty might be wrong. "Tristan," she murmured, trying to right herself, "you can put me down." He didn't put her down. His arms tightened. "No," he said hoarsely, "I have you." He stared straight ahead, his blue eyes wide with panic. If it is true, he thought, the fear tasting like metal in his mouth, then I have everything to lose. "I think," Amara whispered against his neck, her voice barely audible. "I think you should send for the doctor again, Tristan, but not for the heat." Tristan looked down at her. Their faces were inches apart. "I know," he breathed. He turned and carried her up the stairs, walking through the ruins of his own defenses, terrified of the hope that was beginning to beat in his chest. The garden. Twilight. The heat of the day had finally broken, leaving behind a twilight that was bruised with purple and gold. The air in the garden was heavy, smelling of damp earth and the night-blooming jasmine that climbed the stone walls of the estate. It was the only time of day when Calcutta felt merciful. Amara sat on a stone bench beneath the banyan tree. She was wearing a sari of pale blue silk, the fabric draped loosely over her changing shape. She was still. She had learned to be still in this house. She sat with her hands resting in her lap, watching the fireflies begin their dance in the shadows. Tristan stood 10 feet away. He was leaning against a marble pillar, a cheroot burning forgotten between his fingers. He wasn't smoking it. He was watching her. He watched her with a vigilance that bordered on obsession. Since the day she had nearly fainted in the foyer, he had become a ghost in her periphery. He hovered. He watched her eat. He watched her walk. He watched her breathe. He told himself he was merely ensuring the asset was protected, but the lie tasted like ash in his mouth. He was terrified. Every time he looked at the slight swell of her stomach, his mind went to war with itself. One half screamed impossible. It cited the doctors, the injury, the years of cold certainty. The other half, the treacherous, hopeful half, whispered miracle. And the war between the two was tearing him apart. He slept less now than he ever had. He spent his nights pacing the hallway, listening to the silence, terrified that if he closed his eyes, the dream, if it was a dream, would vanish. Amara shifted on the bench. She let out a soft, sudden gasp. The sound was quiet, barely a breath, but to Tristan it sounded like a gunshot. He dropped the cheroot. He crossed the 10 feet of crushed gravel in 2 long strides, his boots crunching loudly in the quiet garden. He was there before she could take her next breath. "Pain?" he demanded. His voice was rough, panic lacing every syllable. He scanned her face, looking for the wince, the pallor of illness. "Is it the sickness? Shall I carry you?" Amara looked up at him. Her eyes were wide, but they weren't filled with pain. They were filled with something else, something luminous and terrified and wonderful. "No," she breathed. Her hands were pressed flat against the side of her waist. "No pain." "You gasped," Tristan accused, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Why did you gasp?" "It moved," she whispered. Tristan froze. The world seemed to stop spinning. The sounds of the city, the distant carts, the crickets, the wind in the trees, fell away, leaving only the sound of his own blood rushing in his ears. "What moved?" he asked, though he knew. He knew. "The baby," Amara said. She looked at her own stomach as if she had never seen it before. "He moved. It was a flutter, like a bird trapped in a cage." Tristan stared at her midsection. He felt the blood drain from his face. This was it. The moment the abstract became physical, the moment the sickness became a person. He took a step back. His instinct was to run back to the safety of his denial, to run back to the cold, barren life he understood. That is likely just digestion," he stammered, his voice thin. "A spasm." Amara looked at him. She saw the fear. She saw the man who had convinced himself he was broken, standing on the precipice of being whole, and for the first time she didn't let him retreat. "Tristan," she said softly. She reached out with one hand. "Come here." He shook his head slightly. "I cannot." "You can," she insisted. "Give me your hand." He looked at his hand. It was large, scarred from saber practice, rough from reins and weapons. It was a hand made for war. It was not a hand made for this, but he couldn't resist her voice. He moved forward like a man in a trance. He extended his hand, his fingers trembling visibly. Amara took his hand. Her skin was cool and soft against his calluses. She didn't just hold it, she guided it. She pulled his hand down, pressing his palm flat against the silk of her sari, right against the curve of her side. "Wait," she whispered. Tristan stopped breathing. He stood there, bent at the waist, his hand pressed against his wife's stomach, his eyes squeezed shut. He waited for the nothingness. He waited for the silence that had defined his life. Please, he thought, a desperate prayer to a God he didn't believe in. Please, don't let it be empty. And then it happened. Thud. It was strong. It was distinct. It pushed against the center of his palm, a deliberate, powerful roll of life from the inside out. Tristan's eyes flew open. The air left his lungs in a rush. He gasped, a sound that was half sob, half laugh. Thud. Again. Stronger this time. As if the child knew he was there. As if the child was reaching back. The walls Tristan Blackwell had built for 7 years didn't just crack. They disintegrated. The ice melted. The stone crumbled to dust. He fell. He sank to his knees in the dirt, heedless of his uniform, heedless of the dignity of an officer. He stayed connected to her, his hand never leaving her stomach, as if removing it would break the spell. He knelt there, staring at the blue silk, his eyes wide, shattered, and utterly vulnerable. "A child," he whispered. His voice was unrecognizable. It was the voice of a boy. Alive. He looked up at Amara. His striking blue eyes were swimming with tears he made no effort to hide. "You were right," he choked out. "The doctors, the world, they were all wrong." Amara reached out and brushed a lock of auburn hair from his forehead. She was crying too, silent tears that tracked through the powder on her cheeks. "We were right, Tristan." He pressed his forehead against her knee, his hand still cupping the life he had created. He breathed in shuddering gasps, his shoulders shaking. "I felt him," Tristan said, his voice muffled by her skirt. "He is strong. Did you feel how strong he is?" Amara laughed, a wet, choked sound. "I felt it. He has your temper, I think. He kicked me quite hard." Tristan lifted his head. He looked at her stomach with a reverence that bordered on worship. "He will be a soldier, or a boxer. He has a strong right hook. He, Amara teased gently, wiping her eyes. You remain convinced. It is a boy, Tristan said, with absolute certainty. The doubt was gone, replaced by a fierce, terrifying conviction. I can feel it. We shall call him Dunstan. Amara blinked. Dunstan. It is a strong name, an old name. It means dark stone, unbreakable. It is a terrible name, Amara said, a smile breaking through her tears. It sounds like a fortress, not a baby. He will be a fortress, Tristan vowed. He will be safe. I will make him safe. And if she is a girl? Amara asked. Tristan paused. He looked at his hand, still resting on her belly. He imagined a little girl. A girl with Amara's dark eyes and his own stubborn chin. A girl who would need even more protection in this harsh world. The thought didn't terrify him. It humbled him. Then Dunstan suits her anyway, he said softly. She will need to be made of stone to survive us. Amara laughed again, and Tristan thought it was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. He didn't stand up. He didn't pull away. He shifted closer, resting his cheek against the side of her stomach, wrapping his other arm around her waist. He hugged her, and the child, holding on as if they were the only solid things in a spinning universe. The twilight deepened into night. The fireflies blinked around them. The servants would be looking for them soon. Dinner would be cold. Tristan didn't care. He closed his eyes, listening to the rhythm of two heartbeats. Hers, steady and calm, and the new one, rapid and fierce. My child, he whispered into the silk. He said it again, testing the weight of the words, letting them settle into his bones where the emptiness used to be. My child, mine. For the first time in his life, Tristan Blackwell wasn't just existing, he was alive. And as the baby kicked against his cheek, a sharp, answering thud against his face, he knew that he would burn the world down before he let anything happen to this miracle. Calcutta Social Club, evening. Tristan Blackwell had become a problem. It was not the kind of problem he used to be, the cold, aloof officer who frightened new recruits with a single look. He had become something far more volatile. He had become a man possessed. The dining room of the social club was a cavern of polite conversation and clinking crystal. Ceiling fans stirred the humid air, doing little to cool the temperature. Amara sat across from him, her pregnancy now undeniable, the swell of her stomach pressing against the silk of her gown. She looked radiant. She looked soft. Tristan looked like he was guarding the crown jewels from a pack of wolves. A waiter approached the table to refill the water glasses. He was young, nervous. His eyes flickered, briefly, innocently, toward Amara's waist. Tristan's fork hit the china plate with a sharp clack. Is there a difficulty? Tristan asked. His voice was low, but it carried the distinct threat of violence. The waiter froze, the pitcher shaking in his hand. Sir, you seem fascinated by my wife, Tristan said, leaning forward. His blue eyes narrowed into slits. Do you require a closer look, or can you pour the water without staring? Tristan, Amara whispered, mortified. She placed a hand on his wrist. He was merely looking for the glass. He was looking at you, Tristan snapped, not breaking eye contact with the terrified boy. Pour the water, then leave. The waiter poured, spilled a drop on the tablecloth, and fled. You are making a scene, Amara murmured, withdrawing her hand. I am establishing boundaries, Tristan replied, returning to his meal. He cut his steak with violent precision, the knife screeching against the porcelain. Men in this city have no manners. They stare. They whisper. They are whispering, because you look like you are about to challenge the maitre d' to a duel, Lord Everett Walsh said, sliding into the empty chair beside them. Tristan didn't look up. You are late, Everett. And you are insane, Everett replied cheerfully. He stole a roll from the breadbasket. I heard about the incident at the milliner's shop yesterday. Is it true you made them air out the shop for an hour before you let Amara enter because you thought the dust would make her sneeze? Amara hid a smile behind her napkin. He also made them bring a chair to the pavement so I did not have to stand while waiting for the carriage. Dust carries disease, Tristan said stiffly, and standing causes swelling in the ankles. It is a medical fact. Everett looked at Amara. He's a lunatic. How do you stand it? Amara looked at her husband. She saw the tension in his jaw. She saw the way his eyes constantly scanned the room, checking the exits, checking the guests, checking the air itself for threats. She knew it wasn't control. It was terror. He had gone from believing he had nothing to lose to believing he had everything to lose, and the shift had left him raw. "He means well," Amara said softly. Tristan grunted, stabbing a potato. "I mean to keep you alive. If that is lunacy, then buy me a straitjacket." Blackwell Estate, the weeks of waiting. The protective instinct did not stop at the door of the club. It permeated every inch of the Blackwell Estate, transforming the house into a fortress of cushions and anxiety. The carriage. Tristan inspected the carriage before every outing. He checked the springs. He checked the wheels. "The suspension is too stiff," he told the driver, a man who had been driving carriages for 30 years. "It jostles her. Fix it." "Sir, it is a carriage," the driver replied wearily. "The roads are cobblestone." "Then drive slower," Tristan ordered. "If she bounces, you are fired." When Amara finally climbed inside, she found the interior lined with 6 down pillows. She looked like she was being packed for shipping. The kitchen. Tristan stood in the kitchen, arms crossed, watching the cook prepare curry. "Less spice," Tristan commanded. "It is already mild, Captain. It smells aggressive. She had heartburn last Tuesday. Do not use the chili. It will have no flavor." "Flavor is secondary to comfort," Tristan declared. He picked up a spoon and tasted the sauce. He frowned. "Too salty. Start again." The bedroom. 3 a.m. Amara woke to the feeling of eyes on her. She blinked in the darkness. Tristan was awake. He was lying on his side, propped up on one elbow, watching her. His hand was resting lightly on the mound of her stomach. "Tristan," she whispered sleepily. "Is something wrong?" "No," he whispered back. "Go to sleep." "Why are you awake?" "I am counting his kicks," he said seriously. "He has been quiet for an hour. I was concerned." "He is sleeping, Tristan. Babies sleep." "Lazy," Tristan muttered, but he stroked her stomach with his thumb, his touch feather-light. "He should be drilling." Amara smiled, closing her eyes. She felt safe, suffocated perhaps, but safe. The smoking room. Late afternoon. Everett found Tristan staring out the window at the garden, a glass of brandy untouched in his hand. "You are driving her mad," Everett said, closing the door. Tristan didn't turn. "I am protecting her." "You are protecting her from life, Tristan. You wouldn't let her walk in the garden yesterday because there was a suspicious bee." Tristan turned. He looked exhausted. The shadows under his eyes were deep bruises. "Bees sting, Everett. Venom causes shock." "Tristan," Everett said, his voice dropping the joking tone. "Sit down." Tristan sighed and sank into the leather armchair. He rubbed his face with his hands. "I cannot help it." "You are terrified," Everett stated. "Yes," Tristan admitted. The word hung in the air, heavy and honest. "I am terrified." He looked up at his friend. "For 7 years, I was empty. I made peace with the emptiness. I knew that when I died, it would be over. No loose ends. No grief left behind." He gestured vaguely toward the ceiling, toward where Amara was resting. Now there is a future. There is a heartbeat. And every time she stumbles, every time she grimaces, I feel like my own heart is stopping. If the world tilts back, if the doctors were right about my luck, if not my body, if I lose this." His voice cracked. He couldn't finish the sentence. The thought was a physical pain, a knife twisting in his gut. Everett poured himself a drink and sat opposite him. "You won't lose them, Tristan. But you have to let her breathe. Stress is as dangerous as bees." Tristan let out a short, humorless laugh. "Husband instincts. You said I needed them. You did not tell me they would feel like a constant heart attack." "That's the secret," Everett grinned. "It never stops. Wait until the child starts climbing trees. You'll be soaring down every branch in India." Tristan managed a weak smile. "I shall simply ban trees." The bedroom. Evening. The sun had set, casting the room in deep, warm shadows. Amara was sitting on the edge of the bed, trying to unlace her boots. It was a futile effort. Her stomach was now a significant obstacle. She let out a frustrated sigh and sat back. Tristan appeared from the dressing room. He was out of his uniform, wearing only his trousers and a loose white shirt. He saw her face. "Pain?" he asked instantly, stepping forward. "No," Amara said, waving him off. "Just mechanics. I cannot reach my feet, and my back feels like it is breaking in half." Tristan knelt before her. He didn't speak. He gently lifted her foot and placed it on his knee. His large hands worked the laces with practiced ease, sliding the boot off, then the stocking. He did the same with the other foot. Then he began to rub. His thumbs pressed into the arch of her foot, working out the tension. Amara groaned, her head falling back. "Better?" he asked, looking up at her. "Heaven," she breathed. He finished with her feet and stood up. "Turn around." She shifted on the bed so her back was to him. Tristan sat behind her. He placed his hands on her lower back, his fingers finding the knots in the muscles along her spine. He massaged her with a strength that was perfectly controlled, firm but gentle. Amara leaned back against him. She felt the solid wall of his chest. She could smell the soap on his skin and the faint scent of the brandy he hadn't drunk. "You are good at this," she murmured. "I know anatomy," he said simply. "I know where the strain carries." He moved his hands to her shoulders, kneading the tension there. Amara felt herself melting. The anxiety of the pregnancy, the fear of the birth, the overwhelming heat, it all receded under his touch. "Tristan," she said softly. You are a good father already." Tristan's hands paused. He rested his chin on her shoulder, his cheek pressing against hers. He wrapped his arms around her, his hands coming to rest over her stomach, covering the child completely. "I am trying," he whispered into her ear. "I do not know how to be soft, Amara. I only know how to guard." "You are guarding us well," she said, covering his hands with hers. "But you can rest too. We are here. We are not going anywhere." He closed his eyes, inhaling the scent of her hair. For a moment, the fear receded. He felt the baby shift under his hands, a slow, rolling movement. "Dunstan is awake," he murmured. "She is awake," Amara corrected, smiling. Stubborn, Tristan kissed her neck, like his mother. Later that night, the peace shattered. Tristan had fallen asleep. It was a rare, deep sleep, brought on by the emotional exhaustion of the day. He was dreaming of a little boy running through the garden, a boy with auburn hair and dark eyes. He was woken by a sound. It wasn't a cry. It was a gasp, a sharp, wet intake of breath. Tristan was awake instantly. The soldier was back. "Amara?" He sat up. The lamp was out, but the moonlight cut across the room. Amara was standing by the foot of the bed. She was clutching the bedpost with one hand, her other hand gripping her stomach. She looked at him. Her face was a mask of pure, white terror. "Tristan," she choked out. "What is it?" He scrambled out of the sheets, his heart slamming into his throat. "Is it the baby?" "Something is wrong," she whispered. She took a step toward him, and then she buckled. "Amara!" He lunged. He caught her before she hit the floor, his arms locking around her waist. She was heavy, dead weight in his arms. She cried out, a guttural sound of pain that tore through the quiet room. Then he felt it. Warmth. Wetness. He looked down. On the white rug, spreading out from beneath her bare feet, was a dark, expanding pool. It wasn't just water. In the moonlight, it looked black. Blood. The scent hit him, metallic and sharp. "No," Tristan whispered. The word fell out of his mouth like a stone. "No, no, no." Amara gripped his shirt, her fingernails digging into his skin. "It hurts," she sobbed, her voice rising to a scream. "Tristan, it hurts." He scooped her up, his own blood running cold, his vision tunneling. The world tilted. The fortress had been breached. "I have you!" he screamed, though he felt like he was falling. "I have you!" He kicked the bedroom door open, the wood splintering against the wall. "Help!" he roared into the silent house, a sound of primal, animal panic. "Someone help us!" But the only answer was the echo of his own voice, and the terrifying silence of the child inside her that had suddenly, inexplicably, stopped moving. Blackwell Estate. The long night. The door to the master bedroom slammed shut. The sound was not loud. It was a heavy, final thud of oak against the frame, but to Tristan it sounded like a guillotine blade dropping. He stood in the hallway. He was barefoot. His white shirt was soaked through with sweat, and across the front, blooming like a horrific poppy over his heart, was a stain of bright, fresh crimson. Her blood. He stared at the wood grain of the door. He raised a hand to push it open, to break the lock, to tear the hinges off if he had to. "You cannot go in there, Captain." The voice came from behind him. It was Dr. Sterling, a man Tristan had summoned with a terrifying scream only 20 minutes ago. Tristan spun around. His eyes were wild, the pupils blown wide, swallowing the blue. He looked like an animal cornered in a trap. "That is my wife," Tristan snarled. The sound tore out of his throat, raw and unrecognizable. "Do not tell me where I can go in my own house." "She is hemorrhaging, sir," Sterling said, his voice calm, professional, infuriating. "We need to stop the bleeding. If you go in there in this state, panicked, shouting, you will kill her faster than the blood loss. She needs calm. She needs silence." Tristan flinched as if the doctor had struck him. "Kill her." The words hung in the humid air. She is awake?" Tristan asked, his voice cracking, the anger dissolving into a pathetic, childish plea. "She is unconscious," Sterling said. "We have administered laudanum. Now let us work." The doctor turned and slipped into the room, closing the door again. The lock clicked. Tristan stood alone in the hallway. He looked down at his hands. They were shaking so violently he couldn't make a fist. There was blood under his fingernails. He backed up until his shoulders hit the opposite wall. He slid down the plaster, his legs giving way, until he was sitting on the floor, his knees pulled to his chest. He pressed his forehead against his knees and wrapped his arms around his head, trying to shut out the silence. The silence was the worst part. He wanted screaming. He wanted chaos. Chaos meant life. Silence meant the end. The hallway. 1 hour later. Everett Walsh found him there. Everett didn't make a joke. He didn't stride in with his usual energy. He walked down the hall slowly, his face pale. He saw Tristan sitting on the floor, still covered in blood, staring at a spot on the carpet with dead eyes. Everett sat down next to him. He didn't care about the blood. He leaned his back against the wall, mirroring his friend's posture. They sat in silence for a long time. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock downstairs, measuring out seconds that felt like hours. "Is she—" Everett started, then stopped. He couldn't finish the question. "I don't know," Tristan whispered. He didn't blink. "They won't let me in." Everett let out a slow breath. "Sterling is the best in Calcutta. If anyone can save them." "It's my fault," Tristan said. The words were flat, a statement of fact. "Tristan, don't—" "It is my fault," Tristan repeated, louder. He turned his head to look at Everett. His face was a ruin. The sharp, handsome features were twisted with a self-loathing so deep it was painful to witness. "I brought her here. I forced her into this life. I stressed her. I terrified her. You said it yourself. I was driving her mad." "I was joking, Tristan. That was banter. This is biology. It's nature. It's cruel, but it's not your fault." "I lied to her," Tristan said, his voice trembling. He looked back at the door. "I told her this was a transaction. I told her I was broken. I made her believe she was nothing but a pawn in a game against her father." He choked on a sob, a jagged sound that scraped his throat. "I wanted to punish him, Everett. That was the plan. I wanted to take his daughter and show him that his legacy ended with me. I wanted to watch his name die." He looked at his blood-stained hands. "But I didn't punish him," he whispered. "I punished myself. I fell in love with her, Everett. I fell in love with the pawn. And now the board is being flipped. And I am the one losing everything." Everett reached out and gripped Tristan's shoulder hard. "Stop it. You are not writing an obituary. She is strong. You told me she is stubborn. She is fighting." "I never told her," Tristan said, tears finally spilling over, cutting tracks through the grime on his face. "I never told her I loved her. I only told her to eat, to sleep, to be careful." He buried his face in his hands. "I only gave her orders. I never gave her my heart." The bedroom, the vigil. The door opened. Dr. Sterling stepped out. He looked exhausted. His sleeves were rolled up, and his apron was stained. Tristan was on his feet in a second. He didn't ask. He just looked at the doctor, his soul hanging in the balance. "The bleeding has slowed," Sterling said quietly. "She is stable, for now." Tristan let out a breath that sounded like a dying man's last gasp. "The child?" he asked. Sterling hesitated. "The child is still inside, but the labor has stopped. It is too early, Captain. If the child comes now—" He didn't finish. He didn't have to. "She is weak. She needs to rest. If the bleeding starts again—" "Can I see her?" "Briefly. Do not wake her." Tristan walked into the room. The air smelled of copper and lavender water. The curtains were drawn, making the room dark despite the midday sun outside. Amara lay in the center of the massive bed. She looked terrifyingly small. Her skin was the color of parchment, translucent and fragile. Her dark hair was fanned out across the white pillow, damp with sweat. Tristan approached the bed as if walking on holy ground. He pulled the chair close and sat down. He didn't take her hand. He was afraid his grip would bruise her. He just watched her face. He watched the shallow rise and fall of her chest. He stayed there for hours. The afternoon turned to evening. The shadows lengthened across the floor. The doctor came and went, checking pulses, changing cloths, whispering instructions to the nurse. Tristan didn't move. He didn't eat. He didn't drink. He was a statue of penance. Around midnight, she stirred. It was a small movement, a twitch of her fingers, a furrowing of her brow. Tristan leaned forward instantly. "Amara?" Her eyes fluttered open. They were hazy, drugged with the laudanum, swimming in a sea of confusion. She blinked, trying to focus on the shape hovering over her. "Tristan?" Her voice was a rasp, barely a whisper. "I am here," he said softly. He took her hand then, unable to stop himself. He held it in both of his, bringing it to his lips. "I am right here." "The baby," she murmured, her hand drifting weakly toward her stomach. "He is safe," Tristan lied. He didn't know if it was a lie. He hoped it wasn't. "He is resting. You must rest too." Amara looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the blood on his shirt. She saw the red-rimmed eyes. She saw the man who had been stripped down to his rawest, most terrified self. "You are crying," she whispered. Tristan shook his head, a tear dropping onto her knuckles. "I am not. It is the light." "You are a terrible liar," she breathed, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. Tristan let out a shuddering breath. He lowered his forehead to her hand. "I am sorry," he said. The confession he had made to Everett was not enough. He needed to say it to her. "I am so sorry, Amara." "For what?" "For everything," he choked out. "For the contract, for the coldness, for making you think you were a burden." He lifted his head, his blue eyes searching hers, desperate and intense. "I married you to punish your father," he said, the words rushing out. "I wanted to hurt him, but I was a fool. I didn't know that you would become the air I breathe." Amara watched him, her eyes softening. "Tristan, I love you," he said. He said it with a fierceness that startled them both. "I do not care about the legacy. I do not care about the name. I only care about you. If I lose you, I will burn this house to the ground. I cannot live in it without you." Amara squeezed his fingers weakly. "You will not lose me. I am stubborn." "Yes," he kissed her fingers again. "You are difficult and stubborn, and I love you." She closed her eyes, the exhaustion pulling her back under. "Stay? I am never leaving," he vowed. "I will be here when you wake." She drifted off, her breathing evening out. Tristan stayed. He watched the rise and fall of her chest, counting every breath, willing his own strength into her body. The turning point. The peace lasted for 3 hours. At 3 a.m., the atmosphere in the room changed. Amara whimpered in her sleep. Tristan stiffened. "Amara?" She tossed her head, her brow furrowing in pain. She groaned, a low, guttural sound that raised the hair on Tristan's arms. She opened her eyes. The haze was gone. In its place was sharp, crystalline agony. "Tristan!" she gasped, clutching his hand so hard her nails cut into his skin. "I am here. Is it pain?" "It's breaking," she cried out. Her body arched off the mattress, rigid with a contraction that was violent and sudden. "Doctor!" Tristan screamed toward the door, not letting go of her hand. Sterling rushed in from the adjoining room, looking disheveled. He took one look at Amara, and his face went grave. "The labor is starting again," Sterling said, moving to the foot of the bed. "It is not stopping this time." "It is too early," Tristan yelled. "You said it was too early." "Nature does not listen to me, Captain," Sterling snapped, pulling back the sheets. He looked up, his expression grim. "The bleeding has returned. She cannot sustain a long labor. We need to deliver this child now." Amara screamed again, a sound of pure torture that ripped through Tristan's soul. "Save her!" Tristan grabbed the doctor by the lapels of his coat. "Do not worry about the child. Save her." "I will try to save both," Sterling said, pushing Tristan back. "But you need to hold her. She is going to panic. I need you to be her anchor." Tristan turned back to the bed. Amara was thrashing, lost in the waves of pain. He climbed onto the bed behind her. He didn't care about the blood. He didn't care about the propriety. He pulled her back against his chest, wrapping his arms around her, locking her into his embrace. "I have you!" he roared into her ear over her screams. "I have you, Amara! Look at me! Focus on me!" She threw her head back against his shoulder, her face wet with tears and sweat. "I can't!" she sobbed. "Tristan, I can't do it!" "You can," he commanded, his voice shaking but loud. "You are a Blackwell. We do not surrender. You hear me? We do not surrender." But as another contraction hit her, draining the colour from her face and leaving her limp in his arms, Tristan looked up at the doctor. Sterling caught his eye. The doctor gave a microscopic shake of his head. The message was clear. She is fading. Tristan buried his face in her neck, holding her as if he could physically keep her soul inside her body by force of will alone. "Stay with me," he begged, his voice breaking into a sob. "Please, God, stay with me." And then Amara's head fell forward, her body going terrifyingly still. Sunrise. The silence in the room was heavier than the scream had been. It was a suffocating, physical weight that pressed against Tristan's eardrums. Amara was limp in his arms. Her head rested heavily against his shoulder, her neck slack. She wasn't moving. "Amara!" Tristan shook her, his voice a broken, jagged thing. "Amara! Breathe!" "She has fainted from the pain," Dr. Sterling barked, his voice cutting through the panic. "Keep her upright, Captain. We are not finished." Tristan didn't know how he did it. He was a man who had not eaten or slept in 24 hours. He was running on adrenaline and terror, but he held her. He wrapped his arms around her unconscious form, anchoring her against his chest, becoming the spine she no longer had the strength to be. The room was turning grey. The first light of dawn was bleeding through the cracks in the curtains, casting long, ghostly shadows across the bloody sheets. "One more," Sterling grunted, sweat dripping from his nose. "I see the head. Come on, little one." Tristan buried his face in Amara's damp hair. He closed his eyes. He couldn't look. He couldn't watch the doctor pull a life out of the woman he was terrified he had killed. "Please," he prayed to the grey light, "take me instead. Take everything I have. Just let them live." There was a wet, squelching sound, a flurry of movement. Then, silence again. Tristan stopped breathing. His heart stopped beating. The world suspended itself on a wire. Why is it silent? The thought screamed in his mind. Babies cry. Why isn't it crying? He lifted his head, terror seizing his throat. He looked at the doctor. Sterling was holding a small, purple, wriggling bundle in his hands. He was rubbing its back vigorously with a rough towel. "Come on," Sterling whispered. "Breathe." Tristan stared. The baby looked lifeless, small, too small, and then a gasp. It was a tiny sound, like a hiccup, followed by a wail. It started thin and high, a furious, indignant protest against the cold air of the room. Then it grew louder, stronger, a scream of pure, undeniable life. The sound shattered Tristan. He slumped forward, his forehead hitting Amara's shoulder. A sob tore out of his chest, a violent heaving sound that he couldn't suppress. "Alive," he choked out. "Alive." "A fighter," Sterling announced, his voice thick with relief. He wrapped the baby quickly in a blanket. Small, but fierce. Tristan looked down at Amara. The sound of the cry seemed to reach her, even in the dark. Her eyelids fluttered. She drew a shallow, ragged breath. "Tristan?" she murmured, her voice barely a ghost. "She is here," Tristan wept, tears streaming down his face, washing away the blood and grime. "Amara, listen. Listen to that." Amara's eyes opened. She heard the wail. A weak, beautiful smile touched her lips. "Is it Dunstan?" she whispered. Dr. Sterling turned, holding the bundle. He looked at Tristan, then at Amara. "Well," the doctor said, a tired smile breaking through his exhaustion, "unless Dunstan is a very progressive name, you have a daughter, Captain." The sun had fully risen. It flooded the room with a soft, golden light that made the dust motes dance. The bloody sheets had been stripped away. The windows were open, letting in the fresh morning air that smelled of dew and jasmine. Tristan sat on the edge of the bed. He had washed his face and hands, though he refused to leave the room to change his shirt. He needed to be here. Amara was propped up against fresh pillows. She was pale, incredibly weak, but her eyes were bright. And in her arms lay the impossible. The baby was tiny. Her skin was pink and wrinkled, and she had a tuft of dark hair that stood up in every direction. She was wrapped so tightly in a white blanket, she looked like a small, angry caterpillar. Tristan stared at her. He was afraid to touch her. He felt giant and clumsy and dangerous next to something so perfect. "She has your chin," Amara said softly, running a finger down the baby's cheek. "She is small," Tristan whispered. Is she too small? She is perfect, Amara corrected. She looked up at him. Hold her. Tristan recoiled slightly. I cannot. I am shaking. You held us both when we were dying, Amara said firmly. You can hold her now that she is living. She lifted the bundle. Tristan reached out. His hands, the hands that had wielded swords and signed death warrants, trembled as they slid under the small weight. He brought her close to his chest. The baby shifted. She let out a small squeak and turned her head, nuzzling against his shirt. One tiny hand broke free from the swaddle. Her fingers, impossibly small, reached out and blindly grasped the air. Tristan moved his hand. Her fingers brushed his index finger. She latched on. Her grip was surprisingly strong. She held his finger tight, anchoring herself to him. Tristan looked down at her face. She opened her eyes. They were dark, like her mother's, but they had a familiar, stubborn shape. Something inside Tristan Blackwell broke for the last time. The final piece of the cold, barren officer he had been for 7 years dissolved. He leaned down and kissed her forehead. It was soft and smelled of milk. "Hello," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I am your father. I am going to make sure nothing ever hurts you." He looked at Amara. His eyes were shining. "She held my finger," he said, looking like a boy who had just discovered magic. "She knows you." Amara smiled, her eyes closing with exhaustion. "She knows you are the safe place." The quiet, holy moment was interrupted by a commotion in the hallway. "Out of my way. I don't care if she's resting. I have cigars." The door flew open. Lord Everett Walsh burst into the room. He looked like he had been dragged through a hedge backward. His cravat was undone, his hair was wild, and he was holding a box of cigars in one hand and a bottle of champagne in the other. "Is it done?" he shouted. "Is everyone alive? Do I have a godson?" Behind him, Clara appeared, looking mortified. She grabbed Everett by the back of his coat and yanked him. "Everett, shush," she hissed. "It is a birth chamber, not a tavern." Tristan looked up. He didn't scowl. He didn't order them out. He just smiled. It was a tired, crooked, genuine smile. "Come in, you idiot," Tristan said softly. Everett froze. He looked at Tristan holding the baby. He looked at Amara smiling from the pillows. He dropped the cigars. He walked over to the bed, tiptoeing in his riding boots. He peered down at the bundle in Tristan's arms. "A girl," Tristan said quietly. Everett let out a breath. Thank God. The world couldn't handle another Tristan. He reached out and touched the baby's foot. She's a bit wrinkly, isn't she?" "She is beautiful," Tristan snapped, pulling the baby closer. "She is a masterpiece." Clara came to the other side of the bed and kissed Amara's forehead. "You did it," she whispered. "You are amazing." "It was eventful," Amara murmured. "Eventful?" Everett scoffed, picking up the champagne bottle. "I found Tristan sitting in the hallway covered in blood, looking like he'd murdered a regiment. I aged 10 years tonight." He looked at his friend. "You all right, Papa?" Tristan looked down at his daughter. He looked at the tiny hand still gripping his finger. "Yes," Tristan said, I am finally complete." An hour later, the Walshes had been ushered out by a stern Dr. Sterling. The room was quiet again. Tristan sat in the armchair, which he had dragged right next to the bed. Amara was drifting in and out of sleep. The baby was sleeping in a bassinet next to Tristan's knee, though his hand never left the edge of the basket. "She needs a name," Amara said, her voice heavy with sleep. Tristan looked at the baby. He thought of all the names he had considered. Strong names. Queens. Warriors. "Dunstan," he whispered, a small smile ghosting his lips. Amara laughed, a weak sound, keeping her eyes closed. "Absolutely not. It means dark stone," he argued playfully. "It is protective. It is a name for a castle, Tristan, not a little girl." Tristan reached into the bassinet and stroked the baby's cheek with the back of his finger. "Elenia," he suggested softly. Amara opened her eyes. "Elenia." "It was my mother's name," Tristan said, looking at the floor. She was the only one who ever brought light into that house before you came." Amara reached out and took his hand. "Elenia," she repeated. "It is beautiful. Elenia, Amara, Blackwell." Tristan squeezed her hand. "Elenia, Amara, Blackwell." He looked out the window. The sun was high now, burning away the last of the mist over the Hooghly River. The world outside was noisy and chaotic and hot, but inside it was cool. It was peaceful. He looked at his wife, who had saved him from his own hatred. He looked at his daughter, who had saved him from his own emptiness. He remembered the contract he had signed. He remembered the vow he had made to destroy the Whitcomb legacy, to let the line end in silence. He leaned forward and kissed Amara's lips, soft, lingering, full of a promise that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with devotion. "I failed," he whispered against her mouth. "Failed?" she murmured, confused. "I meant for you to be my punishment," he said, pulling back to look into her dark eyes. "I meant to use you to burn down the past." He looked at the baby sleeping in the basket, breathing the air of a new future. "But you didn't burn it down," he said, his voice breaking with gratitude. "You built a garden in the ashes." He rested his head on her shoulder, closing his eyes as his daughter let out a soft sigh in her sleep. She was meant as my punishment, he thought, drifting into the first peaceful sleep he had known in 7 years, and she became my peace.